Macbeth, Act 2, Scene 4. This short but important scene brings Act 2 to its conclusion. It is a little later on the same day. We are told in the stage directions that we are somewhere in Scotland. And this scene features two characters. Ross, one of the other Thanes, who we've come across before. If you remember, he was one of the lords that brought the news to Macbeth that he'd been made Thane of Cawdor. And we also have a character that we don't come across again in the play, an old man, an unnamed old man. Now, the reason that the old man is in the play at this point is that Shakespeare intends him to represent the ordinary citizen of Scotland, the sort of person who is going to suffer under Macbeth's rule. The old man speaks first. He says this: 70 I can remember well, within the volume of which time I have seen hours dreadful and things strange. But this sore night hath trifled former knowings. The old man tells Ross that he is 70 years old. A score is 20 years, so 70, that's 70. And the reason that he brings up his age here is because what he's saying is that he's lived a long time, and he's seen many things, and he's lived through some terrible times. But he says, this sore night hath trifled former knowings. I've never known anything like the night that we've just had. Notice that Shakespeare has him describe the night as sore, suggesting painful. And so this is a foreboding, a foreshadowing of the pain that Scotland is going to suffer under Macbeth's rule. Ross replies to him, Ah, good father, thou seest the heavens as troubled with man's act threatens his bloody stage. By the clock 'tis day, and yet dark night strangles the travelling lamp. Is night's predominance, or the day's shame, that darkness does the face of the earth entomb when living light should kiss it? Some important imagery coming from Ross here. He mentions the fact that it is daytime, by the clock 'tis day. But then he says, yet dark night strangles the travelling lamp. Remember going back to Act 1, Scene 5, when Lady Macbeth called upon the forces of darkness to make the night of the murder incredibly dark. That darkness has continued well into the following day. It's another example of the fact that Macbeth's unnatural deed in killing the king is being reflected in nature behaving strangely. It is still very dark, even though it's daytime. I'd also draw your attention to the fact that Ross not only mentions that darkness does the face of the earth entomb when living light should kiss it. That word entomb, the idea of a body being placed in a tomb or a grave, an image of death, which is of course very relevant given what's just happened. Really important quotation here from the old man. 'Tis unnatural, even like the deed that's done. Remember, the killing of the king has gone against the natural order. And what Shakespeare has the old man do here to emphasize to the audience that, yes, things are behaving very, very strangely. Nature is behaving in a very, very strange manner, in an unnatural way, just like the deed that's done, in other words, the killing of the king. I think the reason that Shakespeare has the old man call it the deed rather than the killing, it's another example of a euphemism. The death of Duncan is so shocking and so frightening that the old man cannot actually use the word murder or words like killing because he's so frightened and disturbed by what's happened. The old man goes on, On Tuesday last, a falcon towering in her pride of place was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed. The old man suggests that this terrible deed was actually foreshadowed by nature a week ago. He mentions the fact that he had seen a falcon towering in her pride of place killed by a mousing owl. Now, what Shakespeare is doing here by using this imagery, a falcon is a bird of prey, a very strong bird. Normally, a mousing owl, a small owl that hunts mice, would be the target and prey of the falcon. But according to the old man, things had been reversed, the position had been reversed and subverted in nature, because last Tuesday, the mousing owl actually killed the hawk. So he's suggesting that this unnatural deed, the killing of the king, had been foreshadowed in nature a week before. Ross, in a way, is engaging in some of the gossip here, and he's putting forward some of his own observations. He says, "And Duncan's horses, a thing most strange and certain, beauteous and swift, the minions of their race, turned wild in nature, broke their stalls, flung out contending 'gainst obedience as they would make war with mankind." Duncan's horses, in other words, horses belonging to Duncan, have behaved in a very, very unnatural manner. They've turned wild, almost as if they're wanting to make war with mankind. They've broken out of their stables and are running riot and running wild. They too have been disturbed by the deed that's done. The old man adds further strangeness when he says, "'Tis said they eat each other." So Duncan's horses have turned cannibal. They have actually turned on one another and started to eat each other. And Ross confirms this. This isn't just the old man's gossip. He says they did so, to the amazement of mine eyes that looked upon it. So Ross himself saw the horses trying to eat one another. Macduff then enters the scene. Ross asks him, "Here comes the good Macduff. How goes the world, sir, now? How are things?" Macduff replies, "Why, see you not?" I don't think he's deliberately being impolite here. Macduff's got a lot on his mind. He's saying to Ross, when Ross asks him, "How are things?" Macduff says to him, "Well, can't you see?" It's almost like he's gesturing round him and saying, "Can't you see just how strange and unnatural everything is?" Ross asks, "Is known who did this more than bloody deed? Is it known who killed Duncan?" Macduff replies, "Those that Macbeth hath slain." Now I draw your attention here to the fact that the actor playing Macduff at this point should speak this line as if he doesn't really believe it. For the time being, Macduff is keeping his suspicions to himself. Remember, he's been suspicious of Macbeth since Act 2, Scene 3, the previous scene, ever since Macbeth killed the guards outside Duncan's chamber to stop them talking. We should also be encouraged to understand that Macduff is suspicious here because of the fact that he doesn't elaborate on the detail. He doesn't go into a long speech or any explanation. He just comes out with the very straightforward, "Those that Macbeth hath slain." Ross asks the question, "Alas the day, what good could they pretend?" What he's asking here is, why on earth would the guards on the chamber kill Duncan in the first place? What possible motive could they have? In Macduff's next lines, again, he's pretending to go along with the official version of events. And if you want any evidence to prove the fact that Macduff doesn't believe the official version, then just hang on for a few moments because the evidence is coming up later in this scene. So Ross has just asked, why on earth would the guards kill Duncan? What motive could they have? Macduff says this, "They were suborned. Malcolm and Donaldbain, the king's two sons, are stolen away and fled, which puts upon them suspicion of the deed." Suborned means bribed or hired to do something. What Macduff is suggesting here, and remember, he doesn't really believe this is just the official version that's been put out, most likely encouraged by Macbeth. In answer to Ross's question, he is saying, because Malcolm and Donaldbain have run away from Scotland, that makes it look very suspicious that they may have had something to do with the killing of their father. And what they've done is they have suborned, bribed the guards to do it for them. So he's suggesting that Malcolm and Donaldbain have had their father killed and they paid the guards to do it. But remember, he doesn't really believe that. Ross says, "'Gainst nature still. Oh, what an unnatural thing to do." What he's referring to here is the unnatural deed of sons having their father killed. At this stage, we're not expected to understand that Ross has any suspicions of his own. He actually believes that what Macduff has just told him is indeed the official version of events. I think this next line is quite interesting. Ross says, "Thriftless ambition will raven up thine own life's means." What he's saying here, what he's commenting on here, is the danger of ambition. If you get too ambitious, then you will suffer in the end. Now, he's talking about what he thinks are Malcolm and Donaldbain's ambitions, but of course the one who's given in to his own ambition is Macbeth, and indeed by the end of the play, Macbeth's ambition will come back to eventually destroy him. So this is quite a prophetic line. It's another example of foreshadowing in the play. Then he makes this statement, "Then 'tis most like the sovereignty will fall upon Macbeth." So it's very likely then that Macbeth will become king. And Macduff replies, "He is already named and gone to Scone to be invested." So, these very short lines here reveal to the audience that Macbeth has been chosen to succeed Duncan, and he's gone to Scone, and it is pronounced Scone, not Scone or Scone, Scone, it's an actual place in Scotland. Scone is the place, when Scotland was ruled by its own monarch, Scone was the place where a king, usually a king, would go to be crowned, in the same way that in England today, a new monarch is crowned in Westminster Abbey. So Macbeth has already gone to Scone to be crowned. So where's the logic in this, apart from the fact that Shakespeare needs to have Macbeth king in order to drive the plot forward? Well, I think it's this. It has been mentioned in the play already that Macbeth is a distant relative of Duncan. I actually think the logic behind why Macbeth becomes king is because if you think about it, Macbeth is Thane of two regions of Scotland, Glamis and Cawdor, which makes him the individual in the kingdom with the most power and the most responsibility. So I think logically that's how Macbeth ends up becoming the successor, because he at the moment is the most powerful in Scotland, and so naturally he should then become king. So Macbeth is already in Scone, or on his way to Scone, in order to be crowned. Ross asks, "Where is Duncan's body?" Macduff replies, "Carried to Colmkill, the sacred storehouse of his predecessors and guardian of their bones." So Duncan's body has been taken away to Colmkill in order to be buried along with the remains, the bodies of his family members. Ross then asks the question, "Will you to Scone?" In other words, are you going to go to Scone to see Macbeth crowned? And this next line is the line that I was referring to a little bit earlier, which is the evidence, if you needed any, that Macduff is suspicious of Macbeth. Having been asked by Ross, "Are you going to Scone to see the coronation?" Macduff replies, "No, cousin, I'll to Fife." Now, Fife is a region in Scotland. Macduff is actually the Thane of Fife. He is the Lord of Fife. Why is this line so important? Why does it reveal Macduff's suspicions? Well, it's really quite simple. Macduff is actually doing something really rather dangerous and rebellious by not going to Scone to see the coronation. And the reason he's not going to go is because he does not believe that Macbeth is worthy to be king, because Macduff has these suspicions that Macbeth has killed Duncan. So he's being very rebellious by not going to see the coronation. As a Thane himself, as a lord, it is his duty to go and support his king. but he is refusing to go. He has no respect for Macbeth because of the suspicions that he has about what Macbeth has done. Ross says, "Well, I will thither, I will go to Scone." Macduff's final lines in this scene: "Well may you see things well done there. Adieu, lest our old robes sit easier than our new." Rather ironically, he's saying to Ross, well, I hope everything goes well there, lest our old robes sit easier than our new. What he means by this, he's speaking metaphorically. What he means by this is, I think things have just taken a turn for the worse. Our old robes refers to Duncan's kingship. The new robes refer to the new kingship, the kingship of Macbeth. And he is saying here, I don't think that Macbeth is going to make a very good king. I think Scotland is about to enter a period of great misery and sadness. So Macduff is showing just what a perceptive individual he is here. Macduff goes off. Ross turns to the old man and says, "Farewell, father." We're not meant to believe that the old man is Ross's father, by the way. Father is just simply an affectionate and respectful way of referring to him. And the final lines of this scene and this act go to the old man. He says this: "God's benison go with you, and with those that would make good of bad, and friends of foes." So what Shakespeare does here, we are just on the cusp of Act 3 now. And Act 3 is where things really enter this chaos phase. You know, things have been bad in Act 2 with the murder of Duncan. But Act 3 is really going to concentrate on just what an appalling ruler, what a tyrannical ruler Macbeth may have been. So just before we enter that chaos phase, what Shakespeare does is he gives us a little hint that through the old man, that the play is going to end, I wouldn't necessarily say happily, but that things will turn out right in the end. God's benison means God's blessing. So God's blessing go with you, and with those that would make good of bad and friends of foes. It's just this little hint by Shakespeare through the old man that things are pretty bad at the moment. They're going to get worse, but ultimately things will work out in the end and good will triumph. God is on the side of the good. And that's what the old man is saying when he gives this blessing. God's benison go with you. So we come to the end of Act 2. We will, in our next tutorial, look at Act 3, Scene 1, and we will discover in that scene that another individual who has been relatively close to Macbeth, Banquo, is also starting to have suspicions of his own. So join me next time and we'll look at that in depth.